here we go. We will start in now. My timer says 5 minutes.
Starting in 27 minutes.
Yeah, starting in a million minutes. Okay. I like this ability to just share the little video. We'll give ourselves a 3-minute warning. And yeah, get started on that. I'm going to make a banner because I love a banner. Who doesn't?
Welcome, Lillian. Yeah, no problem. Always better to be early than late.
Right? Especially for us.
Yes.
Look at my fancy scrolling banner. Ooh.
Oh, no. Right into the danger zone.
Oh, with great power comes great responsibility. So I clearly should not have the admin password for the streaming tool. Next thing you know, it's gonna be all fun scrolling banners all the time. I wish I had some music for us as we're letting everyone pop in and take a seat and join us for What's the Score Live. But last time I thought I had royalty-free music, I got a little hand slap. I got a little hand slap. So
YouTube says no.
YouTube said no, and so that was sad. But
you could sing us some Tom Jones, since the Valentine's Day theme.
Well,
see if it picks up on that.
It's not Tom Jones, but I've had a little tune in my head all day. The tune of "If You're Happy and You Know It, Clap Your Hands." But it's about leaving book reviews. Should I? Shall I? If you buy it and you like it, give it stars. If you read it and you like it, give it stars. If my book amuses you, please write a quick review. If you read it and you like it, give it stars.
It's relevant.
I was waiting for the big finish, the big applause. Do I need a sign? Should I make a banner?
Oh, you need a little
applause.
little sign deck for that. You just press a button and it plays the sign.
Yeah. Oh, do I need my drum roll? Is this the show we use the drum roll sound for? I mean, I really could.
we could, but yeah. I think we'll cope.
Well, if anyone would like an MP3 of my new song to encourage your readers to leave you a review, let me know. Maybe we can free with purchase. Great. Well, it is 2 minutes after, and our timer has a rundown. So, looks like we're live on both platforms. That's great. Shall we jump in? This is going to be an interesting one. So, you know that Gareth, the resident horror author of AutoCrit, is going to be stretched today doing a What's the Score of the romance novel Destiny's Surrender by Beverly Jenkins using the AutoCrit platform. So without further ado, I'm going to, turn off that little banner, my favorite banner. For those who may have seen the banner, we'll bring it back later when we talk a little bit about our new offering, What's AutoCrit Live. So tons more fun shows for everyone to jump in and just have a good time with us, get those creative juices flowing. But for today, Beth here at AutoCrit, along with Gareth, and we're going to jump right into What's the Score?
Indeed. Feel free to say hello, sound off in the comments if you're here watching. If you're unfamiliar with What's the Score, we take books, put them through AutoCrit, run through some of the reports, show you what's inside and how they're scoring, so you can kind of compare your own efforts and see how other authors are doing it. Today, because we had Valentine's Day at the weekend, I hope you all had a good one. And this is Destiny's Surrender by Beverly Jenkins, one of the most sort of highly rated romance authors around.
I mean, she's very prolific, yes.
I am not a romance author nor reader, really, but there's still some good stuff to see in here from my perspective, and some surprising scores that I think you'll all appreciate. Speaking of surprising scores, we have always run our first, and I've kept it off screen here because I want everybody to make a quick guess. I guess you can guess a little range. What do we think this particular book might have come in at in terms of summary score?
Now, I'm not going to guess because I have secret info, insider info. But so would it vary? You think, oh, good one, 78, good guess. Now, would it be a difference, or will you show us later, comparing this novel not versus general fiction, which is what you have selected on the screen right now, but comparing it to romance?
We will. Yes, we will flip between the two.
Ooh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, correct, Shannon. There's absolutely nothing wrong with reading romance.
Absolutely. It's just every time Gareth tries, he can't help but think of horrible horror type endings. So your imagination runs wild with you. And so I am getting some love for my song, and I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Ooh, is 89 a good score for my ooh, book's cover for the viewing audience? 89 a good score for my 60s romance novel. Kim, that sounds like a good score. We should talk about that. We have some great guesses here in the community. Absolutely.
Oh, Steve.
Below 80.
Wishing Gareth and Beth would recreate the book's cover for the viewing audience. Now, that would be a horror novel.
What does that mean? I have my cat here with that. I could snuggle her, and that might be.
Well, if I was there as well, I'd be sneezing all over the show because I'm allergic to cats.
Boo. Well, we've got ranges.
We shall reveal. You might be able to tell that it's going to be a relatively high score because of these very low numbers. If you notice in pacing, we're really low, dialogue exceptionally low, only 3 digits. And then we start to get a bit higher. And I mean a bit higher with strong writing. A lot of the time you'll see repetition and word choice are really quite high, but kind of almost level pegging in a lot of manuscripts when you run them through. But this is a surprisingly solid fingerprint. And 84.82 against general fiction is our beginning summary score. So, as with all these lives, we'll run through some of the reports, won't spend too much time on them, so we're not here all night, but we'll see some of the sort of gauges and things and how Beverly's novel comes in. So this is Destiny's Surrender, and I'll try not to show too much of the actual text because it opens, let's just say, in medias res, in the heat of the passion. So
it's a little spicy, a little racy.
Well, if that's what the readers, Beverly's readers want, then she's giving it to them straight off the bat, and that's the type of thing you should do if you got your audience baying for more.
I love that. In medias res, for sure. Yes, excellent.
Start with action. So if we're talking dialogue tags, again, the general rule that we always run off, and that's why it's presented like this in the software, is that you mostly want to use said and asked and avoid using others. Here, though, we tend to find more others than said and asked, which is really strange. So 310 versus 190. But when we actually look at the numbers, in terms of overuse, asked is by far and away the most overused, even though it's one of the kind of quote unquote acceptable ones that we would go with. Kind of trailing second place here, we have said, which is not overused, so that's fine. We can just sort of skip over that. But we have replied, added, and whispered. And these three are probably 3 of the most common alternatives that people will use. Replied, added, of course, if you'll tend to find continued as well. Shows up quite a lot in people's manuscripts because they'll have a bit of dialogue, and then instead of breaking the next section of that dialogue with a bit of action and just continuing, they'll say he continued. And a lot of the times that's kind of redundant, but Beverly doesn't seem to do that. Certainly not showing up here in our top list. But whispered as well is one of the most second common ones.
Whispered, I think, would be pretty prevalent in a romance novel as you're whispering sweet nothings. I feel like it also may appear more frequently in suspenseful stories. Have you noticed anything about that, Gareth?
Yeah, I think you're on the money there. It will be more prevalent in things like thrillers, suspense novels, and especially romance. Romance is going to
Mm,
be a big place for Whispered. However, if we check our sidebar here, what we're looking at in terms of removals for these overused ones, like Husked. I will check that one in a second because that's not something I think I've ever seen as a dialogue tag. So that might be a false positive. I'll just check that in a moment. But we have replied here 21, remove about 13. So 13 of those
mm,
recommended, almost half of the whispered, so 16, 17. And then asked 108 to 41. So
mm.
even though asked is a recommended one, it just seems that it's used a little too many times here. And one of the things we could look at is whether some of those could be removed. Now, let me just check that husked because that's got me intrigued.
I'm so in. Oh.
Oh yeah, it is.
Wow, this is
Oh, and it's a bit steamy. So yeah, he husked out against her ear. I've never heard that used before. Okay, interesting. And some of the asks, if we just click around here, I think, yeah, when I was looking at this earlier, some of these things could be, just a little bit of action instead of just saying they asked, because it's with the question mark in the dialogue, it's a question. Something's being asked. So, they could watch Logan hurry away, and then she turned to Drew, how long are you staying? So something like just turning to look at a character indicates that they're going to speak to them. And then if there's a question mark in that dialogue, they asked a question. But of course, sometimes it is just more economic to save space. Don't add a little bit of extra action. Just go with the tag. In this case, asked. So it's really the author's choice or the editor's choice if your editor ever recommends it. But Rosaline asked. But so we can see some of those there throughout the novel. I guess some of the asks could probably go, whether it's worth the effort at a score that's already at 84.82. I'd leave that up to your own decisions. Part of the things we would like to do is, get yourself up into those 80s and then just make decisions for yourself. You're in charge of it. But yeah, it's just interesting to see that is really the one that is getting in the way. Of course, we do have replied and whispered, but they're nowhere on the level of the number of asks that could possibly go. And whispered is probably one that you're going to want to keep in a romance if that's what you're going for.
Mm-hmm. Oh yes, I'd love to see some of those examples. To be curious around replacing whispered with murmured, but then you start getting into all those like really outrageous,
you start. If you're trying to sort of game the system in that way, you end up just making it worse.
It's going to be very
it's like trying to come up with crazy tags that just get further and further away from your intention just to cheat the system.
Don't let the software bully you, as Gareth always says. Don't let the software bully you. Yes.
Exactly. Or you might end up, oh well, I need to get rid of half of those whispereds. I'll switch them to husks. And things get a bit weird.
And on that note.
So number of dialogue, adverbs and dialogues. This is adverbs attached to dialogue tags, 13% throughout the novel. We mostly have softly, quietly, of course. I would not be surprised to see those too high in a romantic novel. Then angrily, bitterly, coolly, sarcastically, prophetically. It's quite a strange one. Frostily. Hotly, lovingly. So we get some of the romantic ones in there, and of course this is like a very dramatic. You'll see when we get to the power words section of this, very dramatic romance novel. If you're familiar with Beverly's Destinies series, there's quite a dramatic backstory wrapped up in all of that. So softly and quietly.
One I didn't see in the list, which could be a risk, is huskily. Right? So
let's see if that's there.
Oh my goodness.
We do not have huskily.
Oh, interesting. So
we do have sultrily.
Oh.
And saucily.
It's so 1800s. So saucy lasses from the 1800s seems about right.
Yeah, could fit. That actually could fit. Yes, with the narrative. We have quietly and softly. Really are two removals there, but it's certainly not 67 across an entire manuscript. and 13% of the dialogue. Certainly nowhere near the worst we've ever seen. That's actually quite good.
Sure. Now, the trouble I would look for here is if you're using softly and quietly with whispered, because you're whispering softly, obviously.
Yeah.
So see, some of that redundant kind of, shouted loudly, whispered softly, whispered quietly. Those are some of the keys to look for when checking out the adverbs and dialogue as well.
Yeah, because something like this would work, chuckled softly is that's actually a fitting modifier, I think, for something like that, because it sets the tone of that scene. Because a chuckle can be quite loud, and it can be quite I don't want to say almost forceful, but a soft chuckle is a lot different to a more forceful one. There's said softly.
Say my normal chuckle. Yes.
Well, there we have whispered softly.
Oh, yeah, that could maybe be tightened up a little bit. So
yeah, so something like whispered. A whisper's a whisper. Well, I guess I would probably, to my mind, I would keep a whisper unless it's being whispered aggressively, which you can also do. That could be, in front of a crowd or something, and you are telling somebody to behave themselves. Like whispering really with some kind of tone of threat into someone's ear. Otherwise, a whisper's a whisper. And we have quietly, she added quietly. So maybe.
Yeah.
There's quietly pointed out. See, that kind of thing works. You're not being helpful, Logan. Mariah quietly pointed out. Again, that's kind of keeping it on the DL from everybody else. I'm not going to make a point of it here. That's probably almost the kind of threatening whisper wrapped up in there. So it's a good result. Anything that seems quite strange is usually just take it out completely. Again, that's a question for the author to decide. So prophetically seems a strange one to me. But it's used in a sense of the character is telling another character that this is what is going to be. And checking that out in both cases, things will be as they're meant to be, Addie voiced prophetically. Could just be Addie said, don't get a whole lot out of that. But something like prophetically, it's only twice in the whole manuscript, so not a big deal. If it was every fourth chapter, you're going to want to think twice about that.
That's why we recommend run it if you're doing your editing chapter by chapter, which is an option within AutoCrit. We do also recommend that you do a final review of the reports with the full manuscript, because you just may not recognize.
Yeah.
Gareth, do you remember how many words are in this manuscript?
I do not, but I can check. About 73, 74K.
Wow, that's a lot of words. So yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about prophetically twice in 73,000.
Yeah. When we get to adverbs, again, we can see why the scores.
Oh, excellent.
The initial score is so high, we're up here in between good and great, which is an awesome result for adverbs. We've still got overuse, obviously, things like finally, softly, again, showing up, probably, slowly, gently. And you can see the rest there. Silently, apparently, truly. I don't see madly and deeply, though.
Oh.
So we do have some decent amount of removals here. So about half of the finalies, big old chunk of the softlies. But again, we're comparing to this one is stuck run through on romance. Oh. So yeah, decent amount of digging to do on this one.
I love doing these shows with you, Gareth, because people come for the editing, but they stay for the comedy, and we deliver. The true madly deeply really had me. You got me.
Well, yeah, my wife does tell me I'm a joke, so
Oh.
So things like finally, finally reaching her destination. Of course, that's valid. Because it's there. If you just put reaching her destination, then you lose that idea of a long journey, or maybe the character's a bit tired, that kind of thing. So it's definitely there for effect. Same with that other one there. Same here. So she's using finally really to denote frustration or lengths of time.
Great.
And again, good things to think about when you're editing is just because it's read, make an awful doesn't mean you should make it dead or something.
Oh.
Make sure it's there for a reason, and you've done it for a reason as the writer.
There you go.
This is in dialogue. I hear Logan finally tied the knot. Good. We've got others hopefully soon. So they're looking quite good. And I guess that's why we have a pretty good result in the end.
Fantastic, yes.
Filler words, everybody's favorite. We're just now, despite the fact that we only have, and our most used are not overused at all, and we only have these 3, we're still just kind of falling around the average here compared to romance. And again, that's a good place to be. Don't be too concerned, especially if you're comparing to an author or to a specific genre. When you're falling around the average, you're kind of meeting that mark, and then when you start getting better, you're dialing closer and closer in, but you're within the ballpark sitting around here. So don't freak out if you see that in your own stuff, especially with something like this, with the like of vary, remove 4, seam, remove 2, but it's the that's that kind of gives it the kicker here, because we have 19. I jumped around quite a bit in this, checking it earlier, and the majority of them are in dialogue, where that's with a contraction is going to be in dialogue most of the time. There are some that show up in the narrative voice, and that's, again, that's fine. But most of the time, they're in dialogue. So, for example, here, necessity had prompted her to store her feelings for him in the cellar of her heart, and that's where they remained. Again, this is kind of deep POV here, because we're inside that character's head and thinking about it. So this is kind of her internal narrative, and contractions work fine there. It gets the message across. You don't need that is, because that feels a bit more stunted or more formal than is necessary. So looking through it, I didn't see any problems. And again, take that same approach to your own stuff. Just because it's red doesn't mean it has to go.
Is it time for a banner? My banner? Yes.
You still got it loaded. It's in memory.
Of course I do. Of course I do.
Showing versus telling is up next, and that's one of the most difficult areas to deal with, especially in the reporting. Although, again, we're falling right in around the average here, which is good. We have no, get, see, new. See, the problem with dealing with this particular report is that a lot of these words, even though they are the indicators that we've discovered most commonly indicate that you're telling and not showing, they are also words that you will use very commonly. So it can be difficult to work through. And there isn't really a lot in this novel. We can see no here about 36, and new are the 2, and that's a variation, no and new, just a variation on the same word. And usually that shows up in showing versus telling, because you'll be telling the reader that a character knows something or knew something. He knew, she knew. Is there a way that you can give us that information without just jumping right into their head? But sometimes it's easier just to do it. For example, here, I'll skip to a different one because I don't want YouTube to give us a slap for that. And we have no. Got them in dialogue here. I know what I am. Because truthfully, she didn't know. Again, this is just that's narrative prose, but it's information that we don't need to spend a whole lot of time digging into. So it's perfectly fine just to say that and get on with the story, And she knew what the price would be, Again, this works because it tells us more about it's in the middle of dialogue, but it's also in her head here, and it allows the author. This is one thing that's also really good to keep in mind in dialogue, is what the characters aren't saying to each other, and you can fill that in the narrative thing here, because they are talking about this certain thing, but she knew what that price would be, and she just replies, "I'd walk into the bay first." So you understand that she understands that there's different things will be asked of her here than money. So again, smart writing. Do more things like that, because it helps you phrase dialogue or create dialogue that is authentic between the 2 characters, what they know and everything, without having to make them just talk a load of exposition so that the reader understands what they're talking about. No, just give us that a little bit. You can hint at it readers can then use their brains to fill in the blanks and feel more involved in the story. But that's our result for showing versus telling indicators.
Fantastic. Lillian has a great point in the comments here. A lot of people are developing a thing about adverbs and really trying to use as few as possible, which is great advice. Some are necessary, though. When you're reading through, and I think this book has some terrific examples of when they really do work. The final example was a really strong use of that adverb to indicate the passage of time and the frustration and delays and etc. So really terrific specific use of adverbs, and that's the goal of AutoCrit, is letting you as the author be very thoughtful and intentional about when and where you're using those.
Yep. And we have cliches here. That's a tough one because it's only a little, it's not a comparative thing to see how many cliches other people are using, and it just looks for phrases that are generally cliche if they're used in certain contexts. But for example, over the edge is used in a different like "don't push me over the edge" is a bit of a cliche if a character's about to lose it. But in this case, it's just a brush of the lips over the edge of a jaw. That's perfectly contextual, and just about everything that is picked up as cliche in this particular novel is fully contextual. There are some things that are said that are cliches, but of course characters will talk in cliche sometimes. They'll use cliched phrases. People do it all the time, so don't worry too much about that. Touch wood. There you go. There's one. And redundancies is much the same thing, but it's exceptionally low.
Wow, that's quite low.
0.71%. There's a little thing, for example, stood up could be a redundancy. This is said correct. So the hair stood up on the back of Billy's neck. Sometimes you might be saying that a character stood up when you could just use stood, because it's the action. We understand if they're sitting, you've described that, and then they stood. Well, we understand they stood. We don't need the up. It's just this extra word. So sometimes it can be redundant, but in this case, no. You could potentially lose the stood there. But I think the stood up in the middle of the gathering, keeping it complete as stood up, gives you a sense of intention and a sense of bravery in the character to do that in the middle of a gathering.
Nice.
I know some people like to ask about this one, passive phrasing. Always a toughie when you're editing yourself, because even here we have up in the excess for indicators. The passive indicators can be a hard way to go because a lot of it is just past tense, so it can be hard to pick them out. If you find yourself stuck on this one, do what I do. I would pop the show on, stick to the passive phrasing option where you can actually see the true passive, and hop between those. So you'll get parts where the object of the sentence is acted upon. So, for example, here's one here. We have a majority of the girls were enslaved by their owners, but always elegantly clad and exotically perfumed. So the object are the girls were enslaved by their owners, or sorry, the subject of the sentence. Majority of the girls were enslaved by their owners. But that actually works passively. Something like it were enslaved actually works really well linguistically, because in the act of making them a passive object in the sentence, then it reinforces that feeling of the removal of their agency. So it works really, really well. But yeah, in terms of the actual passive choices throughout this novel, again, there's quite a few. Something went missing or we're found floating face down in the bay. But Beverly Jenkins is a really good writer, and none of the kind of actual passive phrasing that pops up around here does anything to lessen the narrative. You can feel her voice as she's just kind of telling you this story all the way through, and it's really good. So again, it's one of these things that focus on the true passive if you kind of get stuck with this one, but don't think that you have to make everything possible into an active sentence. That's not true. So the metal lid was painted bright red. It's just a detail. We don't need to flip that around, because we'll probably end up using more words just to try to make that active.
I was just trying to rewrite that in my head, like the brightly painted lid did something, like that's weird. Yeah, it can get a little awkward if you try too hard.
Yeah, because you end up, when you're trying to do something like that, you might end up with trying to fold it into character actions, so the character looks and sees that the color of the thing is red. But you could just give the detail. Don't beat yourself that hard.
That's right. It's a tough one because passive voice or passive phrasing just gets such a bad rap, but it's not always bad. And the same thing with showing versus telling. Always show versus tell isn't quite right. Sometimes it really does make a difference if you just let it be told.
Exactly. Pacing.
Ooh,
if you're wondering about slow-paced paragraphs, I know some people have asked about these reports that aren't comparative, and yeah, we're kind of putting that on the roadmap to see how many more of the reports we can start making comparative now that there's a ton more data in the system. So some of these things that are just percentages may eventually become actual comparative data for you. But 4.57% of slow-paced paragraphs is a really good result. And we can see here there's kind of one pretty long paragraph here. This is probably around, I think, the inciting incident kind of area, looking at it from just a bird's eye view, which may bring us into this transition into all the action of the actual story. And discounting that, if you brought that down and zoomed in a bit, then you kind of have this nice variation going all the way through the book, which is good to see. You could, of course, jump through and see all of the paragraphs that are marked as potentially a bit slower. Try to find any that are gigantic blocks.
I really liked the variation that I saw on the graph view with the pacing. I kind of would have expected a romance novel to have a little more slowness, but this seems quite pacey. I like it.
Yeah, it's one thing that'll come up in the power words here as well. You kind of see why that is, based on a chunk of the power words. But again, when you're going through this one, there are very few areas that are actually mega blocks. A giant wall of text. It's mostly just paragraphs that are a bit bigger than those that surround it in that chapter, and that's why it gets picked up as a bit slower. But I don't really see anything. We've got this whole section here gets a bit longer, but those are already, to my mind, capably broken up. There's not too much there. And it seems to be a steamy scene, glancing at it there as I scroll past. So that's probably intentionally slowed down for the kind of passion of the scene.
The other thing I'm noticing as you're scrolling through is that she does a lot of very small, what would be considered paragraphs, because she's using minimal dialogue tags and switching back and forth. So it may seem like a paragraph is exceptionally long, but it's comparing to the 6 sentences in a paragraph that happens when she's doing dialogues. So yeah, it could be completely that as well.
Yeah, because one of the things to keep in mind as well is when you're not really using too many tags, as you really shouldn't, when you have extended scenes of dialogue and you're not using tags or really any kind of character action, you're just bouncing back and forth between characters saying things, the pace very quickly starts to speed up because it's just going line as these characters talk back and forth, and very quickly that can just ramp. So that might be some of the issue here, where she has these long, very short, and then there's a normal paragraph, and that's why it just looks slower than what surrounds it. So it seems to be a very pacey novel, all in.
I like it.
Here's another just little bit of statistics for you. Yeah, the initial pronoun and name. So sentences that are beginning with either an initial pronoun or a character name. We generally don't see them go much above 50%. Some in the low 30s. That tends to be the kind of bracket, 30 to 50. And we have 46.49, so within expectations. And again, if you haven't listened to us ramble on about that before, the benefit of that is just so you're not starting sentences repetitively. Try not to have too many sentences starting with a character name or starting with a pronoun. It's like have some fun with the writing. Start sentences differently. Add some variety in there. Play with the language. Let people have a fun time reading it. And the same goes for sentence starters, which is starting with either an ing verb or a conjunction. We have 10.17% here.
Well, that's pretty good.
Which is pretty good. So you can see some, like here, being, casting, seeing, making. Maybe there I might think about changing something, but reading it, starting it with these three, it makes this whole paragraph, gives this whole paragraph a sense of continuous action. The character's active the whole way through it, and it moves past pretty quickly. But wisely, you wouldn't want to do that and then have another paragraph of the same and another paragraph of the same. It's going to start getting a bit messy very quickly.
Mm-hmm. Now, for me, in that particular example, they're so close together. They're all in the same paragraph. There are three of them right in a row. I personally would think about maybe mixing that up a little bit, but yeah, to each author their own.
Yeah, indeed. Ultimately, it boils down to your choice.
Should I show the banner again?
Point of view consistency is a nice one I just like to show because you can glance at this and see what's going on, and this is quite obviously a third-person novel. You'll find first-person and second-person come in dialogue mostly, but if you have this kind of pie chart, this is almost exemplary of a third-person narrative. And of course, if you so wish, you can go by the color on the manuscript and just scroll through. In this case, third person is going to be our blue, I believe. Yep. And just scroll through it and check for places where you see if this had been all green, well, then I would know I have accidentally gone into first person for this chapter or this sequence. And I need to fix that to stay consistent with the point of view that I'm presenting to the reader. Because you don't want to be hopping around points of view from third person to first person and throw in a second person passage for no reason. You're going to throw people off the ride if you do that. And generic descriptions. We have, again, we're falling in around average. Overall, it's really good. The striking us down here. Nice, large, serious, and powerful. So we all know good is one of these ones to dial in if you can, and it certainly recommends here remove about 16, which is less than I would have expected, because the word good, it's in dialogue here, sounds natural, absolutely fine. And something like here, although they'd had good times, that's fine. That's kind of colloquial, and it fits the narrative voice. But you just want to look for things where you're using good to describe the properties of something rather than saying good luck. Just be careful saying something was good when you could be saying why it was good. Use better detail.
The red paint on the...
We get to our power words.
Oh, I'm excited for this one. Oh.
You see, as I said, we have, obviously, this is a romance novel. We're going to have a big old chunk of lust. We have an almost equal amount of fear. And this ties in for two reasons. Number one is romance novels are generally going to have a decent amount of fear because of the nature of the archetypal romantic story. They come together, they lose each other, there's fear naturally wrapped up in that, and then they come back together again. Usually what happens. And in this case, we also have the backstory that's relevant to all of the Destiny's series, which has to do with historic slavery and things like that. There's obviously going to be a lot more fear in there. And but it's bolstered up here by encouragement, which I believe will add to the kind of pacey feel. As well, as you said before, Beth. So again, it's ultimately a love story. So it needs to pull you through with a sense that things are going to work out. So there's lots of encouragement, lots of drama. And funnily enough, greed.
Well, and I think the greed plays well with the backstory about institutional slavery.
Yes, the greed is definitely going to be a major part of the villainous activity, whatever the two of them have to overcome to kind of secure their love. And anger drops in there as a kind of coinciding block of that. So it's a nice spread.
It really is, and we often talk about focusing on two or three, and this does a terrific job of that. And the greed part plays straight into the overall backstory. So I really like this result.
Yeah. This one I was looking for repetition. When you're using AutoCrit, I do recommend obviously looking for repeated words, repeated phrases, and checking your word frequency and everything. But this is one of the reports that is just really you and a pot of coffee and taking the time to go do it, because you can view the summary and see how many. But to find them, you're going to have to mark them and go through one at a time and check that your repetition is there for a reason. It was very hard to find any in this novel that was not really there for a reason, or that I could pick out. And one of the things I always hate to do again is nitpick with any kind of novel. But one that stood out to me was, for example, this across the room. So Logan walked across the room to join his wife, and the other's listening to the bear story. And then right in the next paragraph, again, we're very close. She met his eyes a few times across the room. We could just, she met his eyes a few times. You know, we know where these people are by this point in this scene. The kind of blocking has been set for us. So she met his eyes a few times. Again, keeping the across the room, that could be the intended meter, you know, the tempo and the cadence of the writing that Beverly Jenkins wants. And if that's your case as the author as well, well, then just because it's repeated doesn't mean you have to remove it. A lot of the time you might see, this is a little tip, if you're checking your repetition and you see a lot of it happening in dialogue, so a character will mention something to another character and then the other character in their response will mention that same thing. So you think, oh, I got to take that out. Think twice about that, because people do naturally do that when they're speaking. Somebody will raise the topic, say something about it to somebody, and then the other person will respond mentioning the topic. It kind of, the way we communicate verbally, it almost locks in that topic to just in the air between us, secure the fact that we know what we're talking about. So people do that. And when you remove that part of it, just because it's a little repetitious in the dialogue, then the dialogue starts to sound a bit more terse and unnatural. So don't remove it just because it's repetitious in dialogue.
Oh, great opportunity to talk about that text-to-speech reader, because you can hear it out loud, and if it sounds a little weird, maybe, but knowing that that is how people speak to one another, just maybe a different viewpoint on it.
Yeah. Everybody loves readability, so we've got readability. Flash reading E score, which we always just kind of run on, 82, which is really, really good.
Very accessible.
So again, as we have no doubt seen a few times scrolling through, this is most definitely not a novel for, I don't know, what is that, sixth graders or something? At an 82. It may be accessible for them in terms of language, but I wouldn't want to set them down with it and say, here, entertain yourself.
But it does make it a quite easy read and allows the readers to immerse themselves in the scenes more easily.
Exactly, that's what it's about. Yeah. Whenever you're writing your novel and printing it, you want people to stay just sort of sucked into it. You want them to stay involved. And the moment that they get to some crazy word that you love because you know it and nobody else ever does when you say it, they're going to have to stop and, well, either they're going to just go, what the hell does that mean? And then continue reading, or they're going to stop and look it up. And the moment they do that, even though it's super convenient on like a Kindle, you can just highlight the word, select it, it'll tell you what it means. It still breaks the flow. You've taken them out of the story. You've pulled them out of the page so that they have to do that. That's what kind of readability is all about. Just keeping the language as accessible as possible. Does not mean dumbing it down. Just dumbing down the story or anything that happens in it. Just keeping it more accessible in terms of language, because you want people to just sit there, devour it, and then sing Beth's song as they go give you a 5-star review because they just couldn't put it down.
Yes. And we get this question a lot related to YA novels. A Flesh Reading Ease score of 80 is still great for a YA or I hate to say adult novel, because I don't want it to imply adult subject matter, but that's really the difference in a YA versus a non-YA, let's say. The subject matter in this book would be inappropriate for a YA, but the readability is terrific.
Exactly. I mean, really, the only difference is the audience and who they're written for. Yeah. So that the audience will dictate subject matter and what that audience can tolerate or should be expected to tolerate, or will get you into trouble. You know, won't be accepted by the, I guess, the standards of that community or genre, if you know what I mean. You're not going to release a YA novel filled with stuff like this. Otherwise, you may get turned upon by the wider YA community. So it's just kind of not done there. The same way you wouldn't release, I guess. Well, I guess you can. Something like a romance novel with a cover that looks like something from name me a big soppy romance writer that all of the covers are just like the sunlight and two people hugging.
Well, the Nicholas Sparks situation comes to mind.
Nicholas Sparks.
Two people kissing.
Yeah. I mean, you're not gonna write a book, release it looking like a Nicholas Sparks novel, and then it's a gore fest from start to finish. You're not gonna. It's not gonna fly. Right. So it's all about subject matter rather than how dense the text is. A book isn't for adults just because it's dense, and for young adults because it's not. Not at all. The same kind of area. I think aiming for around an 80, 70 to 80-ish is a good area to be in.
Terrific. And this, that cover art on this book, on Destiny's Surrender, very bodice ripping, if you will. And that gives the reader that expectation that it is going to be a little more steamy than, a Nicholas Sparks one, a little bit more overt with its intimate scenes. So it's about fulfilling that reader promise and their satisfaction with what they're getting when they pick that up.
Yeah, it's not going to be kind of cozy Christmas romance.
Exactly.
We're talking bodice ripper territory. And when we get to the end, this one final score compared to romance. So did it go up? Did it go down? What do we think?
I want to say it goes up, but that first score was quite good. So I'm still going to go up. Oh, Shannon has a great question. In romance specifically, what readability scores should we aim for? And my perspective on that is still for that flesh reading ease, still in the 80. You want it to be accessible. It doesn't necessarily vary that much by the genres within fiction as a whole, in my experience. Gareth, what are your thoughts?
I would agree. Try to kind of hover as close around the 80 mark as you can. Sometimes, it may be quite difficult to get there. Sometimes it's easy. It just flows out that way. But making things more readable is quite an easy process. It's, less complex words. Again, these complicated words that are a bit of a darling for yourself that you might think, oh, this makes me sound so learned. I know so much language, and this is my literary masterpiece. Will actively push away readers, especially in such a mass market genre as romance. You want to be hitting as many people as possible and making it possible for them to read it. Again, it's not about whether the writing is intelligent or whether the content is intelligent and up to snuff. It's simply about accessibility, and the simpler you can keep the writing in terms of the language used. I think the second thing, B, is kind of cut down the length of sentences, so you have fewer run-on sentences. And again, you can do that with paragraphs as well. So it's just making it an easy for them to follow. Will rocket your readability and really bring it up. But it can be hard to get to the 80 mark. So somewhere in the mid to high 70s, probably a benchmark to go for. And that's essentially across the board when it comes to fiction. Because again, you're writing and publishing fiction. It's for people to enjoy, and you want as many people as possible to be able to read it without any kind of hindrance. I hope that answers it. But compared to our overall romance score, we go up to 87.59. Have we lost Beth? Oh, I think we did.
Sorry, I'm here. The answer is 12. Oh, look, it went up. Yes.
Let me see.
The answer is 42.
That was a change from 84.82.
Nice.
Bumped up to 87.59. A nice jump, because a lot of the time with books that are already well written, compared to romance, you might only shift a couple of points, or sometimes points of points, so it stays within a good region. If that's happening, that's still a good thing. it means the core of the writing is very solid. But if you get a nice sort of 3-point jump like this,
Yes.
even better sign that you're kind of on the money with your target market. One thing I did mention there about readability was things like sentence length. So we can actually check that. About 11 average words per sentence here in this novel, getting us up there. Usually, I think what we do tend to see is about 12.
Mm-hmm.
9 to 12, I think, is the normal range that we'd see.
And that's, that'll have a lot to do with what we were seeing on the pacing report as well, making the sentences and paragraphs seem excessively long because she does go a little bit shorter typically.
Yeah, that's what's going to happen, because you're going to have the especially with dialogue sort of bumping like that. That's going to shorten the overall average of sentences and paragraphs, and then the pacing might get caught because of that. So again, something to think about when you look at it. It's one of those things that I do recommend doing when you have a lot of dialogue and you're sort of bouncing back and forth. Just watch out that the pace isn't getting away from you in those sections, that you still have control of it. And if you don't, an easy way to fix it is just plop a bit of character action in there in between the dialogue. So have them look somewhere, have somebody do something physically, and then continue the conversation. You get that little, you kind of pump the brakes there for a second to stop it from flying away.
Mm-hmm. Can we scroll up a little, Gareth, and see the uncommon words? I'm interested in that. Uncommon words and complex words. How do those look in this? Doesn't seem terrible. I wonder if, because it's set in 1880 or so, I wonder if she might have words that feel a little more uncommon or complex, because the dialogue and language would have been different back in the 1880s.
Yeah, it's possible. More than likely, actually.
Yeah, that Flush Kincaid grade level is nice and low, so I would expect it to be a very easy read based on that. It's what I call kind of like a beach read, perhaps.
And seeing here. Sorry, just checking comments.
Oh, sure. Let's see. I had one a moment ago that was quite good. They husked their words back then. Oh, she husked. A great separate question from Lily out in our YouTube audience. After an author does their AutoCrit work, their analysis, their cleanup, is it required to have any other type of final reviews before submitting the work to the agent or a publisher? It's not required, and we talk about this a little bit in the comments as well. It's not required. We always recommend a pass from a human editor. They're going to notice things that software may not notice around your story arcs or character depth, for example. So definitely recommend a pass from editors, beta readers. Of course, it's always up to you, but Lillian has a great point as well. Reading your story aloud is a great way of catching errors and things that just don't flow quite right. And Kim mentions her editor made her put back many words that AutoCrit had her take out because it does read more smoothly. And that's a great underpinning for, I'm going to bring back my banner. Right. A great underpinning comment for, as you're going through the AutoCrit reports, just be thoughtful. Don't let it bully you, as Gareth says. Having your creative voice and having it flow naturally, especially in the dialogue. Reading it out loud, seeing it here, having the text to speech, read back phrases and paragraphs to you, just so you can get a really good feel for how it goes and how it flows. Yeah, don't get bullied. You've always got the 4 R's.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The key thing you're always to remember is that the tool is built for you to control, not for you to control it. So it's made to let you see these things. I know you do get people that are like, never put your work into a machine, it's just going to destroy it. I mean, that's why we don't have a button that literally says fix my manuscript and then it just removes everything that's highlighted. Ooh. Because if we had that and you ran the filler words report and just hit remove all and it it's going to be a mess because so many of those words that can be filler aren't always, and the writing will become stunted. So just remember to hold the wheel as you're doing it and say, no, if I take that out, then that becomes stunted, and I don't want that to happen. You're in control.
And definitely. And as Liz says, don't lose your voice. You are the creative force behind this. You're telling your story. There are ways to make it better, more accessible, flow better, whatever, but keeping your voice is important, which is why we don't have a big old fix it all button. Boy,
yeah, I certainly do recommend once you've been through doing it, get a human to look at it, because a human brain is obviously going to be the best in the end. But the more you can polish it beforehand means it's less time for them to go through and fix things, and less time to end up billing you for at the end of the day. So it's kind of the benefit of it in the end.
And they're billing you for things that really only a human can see, where we can help you find overuse patterns over 75,000 words, and a human editor may or may not see that. So it's they are very complementary, very symbiotic.
And the cooler thing as well, a human editor has a human brain and can interpret stories, so they can give you developmental feedback as well. Like I say, this scene doesn't work. This part, why did this character do this? Did you realize that this was a plot hole? That those kind of feedbacks from a human, that's the only place you're going to get that feedback from actual people. And those are the things that will also kill your chances when the book gets published, if it's riddled with plot holes and characters disappearing and scenes that don't make sense. You need that feedback.
Absolutely. No, and true. Once you work with AutoCrit for a while, you'll find things, you'll fix them, and as you're doing that, you're developing these powerful new habits. So someone mentioned early in our show today, hey, I really cut down on my adverb use. Absolutely. And that will become part of your improved draft style, is you no longer have as many to tune up because you're becoming more aware of it.
Yeah, Jason. I mean, that's a good suggestion. It's one of the things we're looking at. We'll see how much we can actually wrap that in to everything without making it all too cluttered on all the reports. But something we're actively looking at. So kind of everything you see has a comparative benchmark for you to look at, depending on what you're comparing against. And they husked their words back then. Everybody was husking.
Thanks for joining us. He husked. So Jason's question or comment, for those who may be watching the replay and may not see that, it'd be helpful to know kind of an average range on the scores. So 80, for example, on the flesh reading ease, that's what we kind of recommend people shoot for. If you go higher than that, it becomes more simple to read. Lower than that becomes a little more advanced, maybe a little less accessible, but it's all about then your audience. So in addition to being able to make more of our reports comparative and give you those benchmarks, really think about who your audience is. And we have a deep dive live on the readability, for example, and we have a ton of deep dive lives that talk about the individual reports and what some of those good benchmarks might be. But it's really marrying that data with your creativity as the author, and then what your audience expects and desires from what you're delivering.
I see a few comments about the eternal problem of onto. Yeah, that's really a personal voice thing. I think if you try to put every single occurrence of onto into on, put onto the table or put onto the table, put onto the table or put on the table. If you try to do that every time, it's going to start feeling really weird. Onto comes naturally because it is a preposition, so it just works naturally. I don't really see much problem with getting rid of that, keeping that,
or getting rid of it.
Well, yeah. When it comes to the editorial side of it as well, I'm kind of old school in the regard of onto as one word versus onto. So the preposition versus the verb form of like hold on to. You get some people. It's becoming more and more popular now for people to say hold onto, hold ONTO, as one word. This become the kind of discussion that is turning into, start a fist fight in English
that is definitely
in an English department. But I'm still old school on that. Onto ONTO is a preposition.
And I just was reading an article the other day about common words that are misused, complimentary, and the one that stuck out to me was altogether. So the word altogether versus all together. And I find a lot of people kind of mixing those up, and they say, if you can take out part of it and it still makes sense, then I think there are more and more of those things coming up around.
Yeah, a lot of houses are still using the Chicago manual style, which is just great. It works. But we are rapidly getting to the point, I think, especially with self-publishing happening a lot of the time, that readers are just becoming really familiar with it, and the language is starting to change again, as it always is, always evolving, and what's acceptable is changing all the time. So things like that altogether is starting to become less and less of an editorial concern.
Yep. Lillian has a great point. Now when she reads a book, she can't help editing. As you read along, you're just making those mental, like, I would do this a little different. Oh, you should do that.
Well, Lillian, that's 100% representative of, just the biggest thing. Reading makes for better writing. And writing makes for better writing. So you have to do both. You have to do both.
Exactly. And thinking about why the writer wrote scenes or descriptions the way they did, is it their voice? Did they do this on purpose? What are they trying to tell me here? Terrific advice. And reading with an eye toward that can just dramatically improve your author voice and your drafts and your decisions as you're going through, whether you're writing your first draft or editing your final. Absolutely. We always recommend, the 2 ways to get better at writing: write more and read more.
Yeah. She said huskily.
She husked. Shannon has a great comment about going back and forth between, say, a writing program, whether it's Word or Scrivener or something else. Definitely the tips that we have on that right now are export from your writing platform as a docx or an RTF or even a TXT. Our previous advice prior to that is wait until the end to do your fancy formatting and your drop caps and your interesting bits in the look and feel. But export it as a docx, import it into AutoCrit. You can make those changes directly into in AutoCrit, and then you can export that back out. But we do have more in the works and I'm not going to do a big spoiler, but stay tuned.
Yeah, we'll see what works in there.
I'm winking, can you tell? I'm super sly about it. So stay tuned, Shannon. More great things are coming with AutoCrit. Speaking of great things coming with AutoCrit, yes, one of our Facebook attendees says the 3 ways to get better at writing: reading, writing more, and watching What's the Score. Yes. Speaking of, now I have 2 segues. Great things coming with AutoCrit and watching What's the Score. We have announced our new kind of library of offerings. Can I say that? Is that the thing? Talking about AutoCrit Live. Gareth, you want to talk about what's coming up this evening for that?
Sure. Bye, Lillian. I'll see you in the comments there. Thanks for watching.
Yeah, thanks.
We'll see you again. So yeah, AutoCrit Live is pretty much, we have kind of tried to develop, and we'll have more shows coming up. It's essentially what's supposed to be almost like a daily interactive Netflix for writers. So all sorts of things for you to get involved in and keep you in the chair, I guess, is it, and keep you writing. So there's all sorts of live shows. Tonight we have a couple of shows coming up after What's the Score called Pitch It. What time is that at, Beth?
Pitch It is at 7 p.m.
And then we have Book Blender at is that 10 p.m.
That is at 10. So both of these are Eastern times. So 7 p.m. tonight. Pitch It. Come to the show. Bring a blurb or an elevator pitch, like a character's scene, problem. What's the core of the story, and kind of a Shark Tank-esque sort of thing. See if
Dragon's Den if you're in the UK.
That sounds so much cooler. So yeah, that's at 7 p.m. Eastern. And then Book Blender tonight at 10 p.m. Eastern. So a great time for those on the West Coast or for my night owls here on the East Coast, where we take elements of different stories, run them through a blender and see what comes out. Great for coming up with some exciting and interesting writing prompts if you want to do that. Join us live. You can get all the information on how to join us and watch replays of previous shows at, I love this, right? At the banner below, www.autocrit.com/live for the schedule to learn more about all of our other shows and join us live.
And each of these are held live on Zoom as well. We decided to go Zoom so we could actually make it interactive with you guys, the audience. So you're not just in Zoom kind of sitting there watching passively. You can talk to us. We'll ask questions, these kind of game show type formats, especially with something like Pitch It. Mm-hmm. I may join in for Pitch It tonight, even though it's like midnight my time, because I think it's the first one we're doing. So
this is I can't wait. This is the first time we're doing Pitch It, and it is going to be so much fun. So come on through, and I'll do a better summary of that. Propose a story, character, and setting to our panel, and see if you earn a read or a pass. Dragon's Den, is that what it's called in the UK? Shark Tank?
It is, yeah. Shark Tank's Dragon's Den. So much better. It's such a better name.
So much better. So, well, if you're a fantasy writer, then Dragon's Den is going to be for you. But yeah, join us tonight for Pitch It.
For all the other shows coming up, autocrit.com/live. Pop over there, bookmark it. I guess since we're here on YouTube today, I'll do the old YouTuber like and subscribe thing down below. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel. I think most of the shows will come through to YouTube as well. So if you're not on Zoom, you can still pop in and watch us on YouTube and cheer people on. And that's it. There's loads of different shows. So head over to the schedule on the website. Make sure you click the load more to see what's coming up over the next few weeks, because there's quite a variety. Story Doctor's a good one, where we just kind of help you fix plot holes or anything that's a barrier in your way with something you're working on. You can just consult us. We'll tell you. I'll be coming along for a special Mad Story Doctor episode of that if you want things twisted a bit. And we'll see you there.
Fantastic. Thanks to everybody for joining. Thanks for watching us live or the replay. We appreciate you, and we will see you again soon.
Hope you all had a steamy time.
And on that note, bye everyone.